The topics we are about to discuss today, and that is the intersection between disinformation, civil society, and the impact that disinformation is having on our societies and on the activities of civil societies in 4 European regions, is of immense importance. Because all of us can see that disinformation is impacting every single aspect of our lives. And these 4 European regions, which will be covered in today's webinar, are a clear illustration of this trend. I'm very fortunate to have such an excellent group of speakers with me today, and let me introduce them briefly. Let me start with Urte. Urte Andriukaitytė is representing the Civil Resilience Initiative from the Baltic region, and she has extensive experience analyzing the impact of disinformation campaigns, particularly those targeting anti-government and anti-LGBTI plus issues. She's been working in strengthening civil resilience and fostering cooperation between civil society and government in the Baltic states. Our second speaker is Tudor Vrabie from Citizens, focusing on the Black Sea region. Matei's expertise lies in addressing anti-EU and anti-migration narratives, which often undermine national identities in this very diverse region. And he'll be also speaking about some of the sources of political instability in the Black Sea region, which is holding and has been holding several elections this year. Our third speaker is Edith Zgut-Przybylska, a researcher with the Polish Academy of Sciences, and she will provide us with an overview of disinformation tactics used during elections in the Visegrad region. Edith has extensively studied the influence of disinformation on electoral outcomes and also the challenges that specifically the Polish and Hungarian civil society organizations face in rising administrative pressures in some of these countries. And last but not least, we have Marijana Jancheska from Metamorphosis, covering the Western Balkans region. She will discuss how disinformation affects civil society initiatives connected to gender equality, anti-corruption, or LGBTI plus issues. Marijana has been at the forefront of efforts to mitigate the effect of disinformation on CSOs and all these issues in her region. But before we jump into the discussion and into more debate on how disinformation impacts the situation in these 4 regions, let me briefly set the stage, because today's webinar is framed by 4 unique, I would say, unique reports produced by TechSoup and our partners that look into this intersection. These regional disinformation and civil society mapping reports are the background from which also today's discussion is starting. So let me provide you with a very brief overview of the reports so that we have a better informed discussion later on. They are based in relatively rigid methodology, I would say, starting with desk research in 13 countries, which include also interviews with more than 100 experts from civil society and academia also in the countries. Obviously, we also deep dive into social media, and we've been monitoring the most important trends and developments on social media in those regions. Obviously, our partners have been at the forefront of this research. When it comes to focus of these 4 reports, they are unique in its composition, I would say, because on one hand, they provide a very deep analysis of the situation of civil society in these 4 regions, but also cover disinformation trends, and last but not least, also what impact did the war in Ukraine had on both activities of CSOs, but also on the societies more broad. What are the key highlights? Because these are 4 very different regions, obviously 13 countries, different geopolitical situation, different challenges, but yet there are 3 key common trends and challenges that we have observed. And starting with the first one, civil society organizations in all these 4 regions face systemic challenges, and that is connected mostly to lack of sustainable funding, heavy reliance on volunteers and inconsistent funding sources, which obviously negatively influences their capacities in terms of staff, but also their ability to work effectively in such an unstable situation. The second trend is that disinformation campaigns are rampant and wide present across the whole, all four regions. In many cases, these campaigns are backed by Russian or pro-Russian proxies in those countries, but increasingly we see that the bulk of this information is actually carried out by domestic actors, quite often by political actors for their own purposes. And last but not least, civil society organizations are coming under attack across all these four regions. Disinformation is often used as a weapon of choice to delegitimize their activities, to accuse them of being so-called foreign agents, or in some countries, the situation is even worse, where the administrative pressure, all kinds of attempts to silence them or to harass CSOs are on the rise. When it comes to commonalities, there are also some other interesting elements. Disinformation targets usually social cohesion or democratic values or geopolitical alignment in many of these regions. So this is like a very common trend, irrespective of the particular narratives or particular topics. This is a cross-cutting element that we have seen across most of these countries. Then the second, which is maybe not so surprising, is the impact that the war in Ukraine had on geopolitical instability, but also on the war fatigue seen by many of these countries. And maybe just to highlight one more from this list, and that is political instability and polarization. Most of these countries covered are in a significant political polarization phase and or face also domestic instability, which is also a result from such polarization. And we will obviously illustrate this further in the four interventions by our speakers. Obviously, there are also quite significant differences, which is quite logical given the geographical composition and the different situation of these countries. The narratives are different. While, let's say, in the Baltics, disinformation is often targeting historical and cultural issues. In other countries, it's Western alliances, meaning the EU or NATO. And for example, in Visegrad region, it is also quite visible that there are certain pro-Russian forces and also political disinformation. What also is quite different across these four regions is regional security concerns. Obviously, Baltic region being at the forefront and being a neighboring region to Russia is in a different situation than, say, Black Sea or Western Balkans. But we will cover these commonalities and also differences in the next panel discussion with us. Obviously, there are certain recommendations, and I wouldn't really go into details at this point, but let me just highlight them very briefly, four of the recommendations. Since the first key observation was lack of financing and financial instability, obviously the first recommendation would be to strengthen the financial support. CSOs are indeed important part of our democratic societies, and with stable funding, they could not really carry out this role. Second would be to enhance media literacy and digital security. While there is a lot of talk of media literacy, the digital security element is often neglected, and there have been many cases of CSOs being targeted by cyber attacks or undermining their cyber capacities. The third one, we would really need a more regional cooperation. The transfer of know-how, sharing of best practices is often spoken about, but I believe that also our organization, TechSoup, is striving to foster this process by organizing events such as Megaphone, which I hope many of you will attend in the coming month. And last but not least, we need to think maybe out of the box and to develop innovative approaches to those challenges, because our adversaries, be it foreign state actors or domestic actors, are improving their game, and so should we.
It's a huge pleasure to be here today. I'll try to keep it short, but the Baltic region is quite a challenge to cover briefly. It is not a huge surprise that the Baltic states have been one of the main targets of disinformation ever since their declared independencies. Baltic region faced a barrage of disinformation narratives aimed at undermining their various aspects, such as political stability, social cohesion, and public trust. These narratives have targeted society, including and primarily government officials, elections, Ukraine, before mentioned, and social issues. These campaigns have had a significant impact on the Baltic states, contributing to polarization, distrust, and erosion of public confidence in democratic institutions. Even though there's a very common tendency to generalize Baltic states under one name, there are some major differences that should not be looked over. For example, Lithuania, even though the anti-government narratives were at some extent present in all three countries, in Lithuania, it is the most active and the most consistent narrative ever. As the election were and still are in the main spotlight in our country, because Lithuania already had presidential and European elections this year, it's about to have parliament actually next week. A lot of criticism went towards most of the candidates or even the process of election itself. The main idea behind the spread of this narrative is to sow distrust in Lithuanian officials and the whole Lithuanian government in general. Alternatively, suggesting to lean towards other public figures or even foreign powers for more comfort or trust. And this is especially important as we are having a couple of super radical and super pro-Kremlin political parties running for the post in the Seimas election next week. And we have never had so many radical political groups ever before. As one of the most prominent Ukraine supporters, Lithuania is constantly attacked by the narratives targeting Ukraine, predicting Ukraine's defeat, criticizing Ukrainians per se, and especially discouraging financial or any other possible support for Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Latvia, anti-government sentiments are present, also criticizing the Latvian government as untrustworthy, as well as Russophobic narratives are also present, picturing the country as discriminating against Russian-speaking residents. However, Latvia stands out of three Baltic states with the highly active LGBTQ plus propaganda. Mass dissatisfaction with Latvia accepting same-sex partnerships and scandals over the Istanbul Convention were seen, leading to the spread of such narratives as Istanbul Convention will lead to the kidnapping of children. I know that may sound odd, but it actually claimed that due to the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, homosexuals from the EU countries would be able to just steal children from Latvian families. And this narrative actually sparked a lot of debate online. Some social media users were trying to use these stories to mobilize people to even sign petitions against the ratification. Resistance to the treaty comes down to the rise in anti-Western and anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment, oftentimes using it as an umbrella term to target other related topics as women's rights and even connecting LGBT to pedophilia. And last but not least, Estonia is a great mix of Lithuanian Latvia narratives, and all before mentioned topics goes well for Estonians, but special emphasis goes for Russophobia. And Kremlin propaganda focus on portraying Estonians as highly Russophobic country, a narrative frequently appearing in Russian state media, fringe outlets, and pro-Russian social media accounts. Even such significant events as recently found traces of cocaine in Estonia lawmakers' place were adjusted by the Kremlin-aligned channels and used this information to mock Estonian authorities to accuse them of drug use while formulating Russophobic policies. So even though it may seem totally unrelated, pro-Kremlin channels still can drag those conclusions to Russophobic manners. And if we could draw any mutual conclusion from all three countries, that would be that disinformation campaigns are constantly targeting democratic institutions, such as governments, elections, and civil society organizations, as well as actively seek to promote division and distrust within the society. The narratives aim to sow division within societies and erode trust in government and democratic processes, as well as exploiting societal vulnerabilities. Even though the goals of disinformation spread might seem similar to other regions, the means of achieving them differ even within three Baltic countries that are usually put down under the one name of Baltic states. So
thank you for this very deep dive and yet concise introduction to the situation in the Baltic region. And indeed, as you said, even though we consider it as being one region, there are significant differences, which you rightly highlighted. But before we move on to the next region, let me just ask you one question, and please try to keep your answer short so that we have also time for Q&A. Baltic countries are unique maybe in this perspective for their quite close cooperation between civil society and governments. What are maybe some of the key examples of such successful cooperation when it comes to countering disinformation, which maybe could serve as an example for other countries?
I think all this success is pretty recent, and even though Baltic states are being used as an example of close cooperation between the states and NGOs, I think it's just a recent result of very hard and long work, because it wasn't like that all the time. But I think we have Latvia's fact-checking alliance or Lithuania's disinformation observatory that could be the examples of how the governments are finally willing and finally stating that disinformation is a huge deal and a huge problem that we need to fight it. And finally, they are putting their own support and they are trying to help the NGOs to achieve the goals that usually been only for NGOs to achieve. So such as before mentioned Disinformation Observatory in Lithuania or Latvia's Fact-Checking Alliance would be those examples that I would highlight.
It's a great honor to be here today to introduce a topic that is in immense importance for the Black Sea region, the growing threat of the disinformation and the critical role of the civil society to combat it. In this moment, like you said, Daniel, we will have election in the three countries here in Romania, Republic of Moldova, and also in Bulgaria. And disinformation plays a substantial role here in the election campaigns in the Black Sea region, with both domestic and foreign actors involved. In Moldova, for example, disinformation is heavily driven by foreign actors, particularly by Russia, that seek to undermine pro-European parties and push narrative in pro-favor Russian political faction. Russian-baked narrative often frame the war in Ukraine as a Western provocation and spread fear about Moldova alignment with the EU, influencing the voter opinions. In this moment, in Republic of Moldova, they will have two big elections. They will have the presidential election and the referendum to be part of European Union. And in Romania and Bulgaria, while foreign influence is also a factor, particularly from Russia, domestic political actors are the key driven of disinformation during election. In Romania, for instance, nationalist and far-right political parties often exploit disinformation to erode public trust in EU and also NATO partnership. This actor focuses on health, economic, and geopolitical disinformation try to put a label on Romania as a pawn of the West. In Bulgaria, with the fragrant election and political instability, seeks disinformation used to deepen the polarization with narrative that divide society along pro-European and nationalist lines. Across the region, these disinformation campaigns are designed to manipulate voter behavior, undermining democratic processes, and also increasing skepticism towards Western alliances, making election a critical target for both domestic and foreign actors seeking to shape the political landscape. The political landscape. Also, I want to discuss a little bit more about the geopolitical context in countries like ours, Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria. Disinformation thrives in environments where political instability and economical vulnerability persist. Moldova, for instance, is particularly susceptibility to external Russian influence, as demonstrated by the ongoing presence of the Russian military forces in Transnistria and also Kremlin-backed propaganda. Romania, on the other hand, gripes with internal disinformation that seeks to undermine the trust in Western alliances, like I said. And in Bulgaria, the problem is the disinformation polarize the society and divide the society with pro-European and nationalism sentiment. The impact of Russia's war in Ukraine has only intensified these dynamics as disinformation related to the war, and it's used to stroke fears, justify the aggression, and also to polarize the public opinion in these countries. And I want to mention here the influx of the Ukrainian refugee in this region has further complicated the situation as false narrative emerge around the refugee crisis, feeding into xenophobia and anti-Western sentiment. I want to discuss a little bit about the civil society organization in the region that have emerged as a key players in the fight against disinformation, from promoting media literacy to fostering collaboration between government and community. CSOs are the front lines working to counter the flood of false disinformation and misinformation that threatens the democratic fabric of this nation. Yet, this organization have faced significant obstacles. Like you said in the first of your presentation, limited funded political hostility and public distrust are the common challenges across the region. In Moldova, civil society struggles to maintain independence in the face of external pressure, while in Romania and Bulgaria, political actors often target this organization, accusing them for promoting that foreign agendas. Um, Despite these challenges, the resilience of the CSOs in the region is remarkable. Their efforts in media education, advocacy, and promoting ethical journalism had led to important strides in building more informed and resilient community. Um, Addressing disinformation in the Black Sea region requires multifaceted approach. Governments, civil society, and international stakeholders must work together to strengthen institutions, promote transparency, and foster media literacy among the public. The task is daunting, and the stakes are too high to ignore it. As we are navigating this new information battleground, the lesson learned from Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria will serve as a critical example of how we can combat disinformation and protect our democratic values we hold dear. In conclusion, here I want to underline the fight against disinformation is not just about correcting false narratives. It's about preserving the very essence of the democracy. It's about ensuring that citizens have access to accurate information, the public trust in institution is restored, and that the future of this nation is not shaped by the falsehood and need to be by the truth. I hope that our discussion today will inspire us to find new ways to support this effort of the civil society in this vital battle of the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Matei, for these very encouraging words and also for highlighting the crucial role that CSOs have not only in the Black Sea region, but I believe also in other countries. But let me finish this part with one question to you as well. What do you see as the biggest threat when it comes to disinformation? Do you think that actually those disinformation campaigns that you have observed could sway the outcome of the elections in any of the countries? Because now the election period is in full swing, as you just outlined.
Yes, of course, when we are talking about the election, we need to think about the money that are coming in these countries. And in this moment, different foreign actors flood the information and space with a lot of money. So this is a huge problem, and one of the biggest threats in the coming months and also years, it's the increasing the sophistication of the disinformation campaign, particularly those targeting political and societal fault lines. Russian continued influence in this region, especially in Moldova and Bulgaria, will likely remain a significant concern, with a narrative aiming to weaken the EU and NATO ties and promote the instability. This threat is ongoing, and also the war in Ukraine, which serve a fertile ground for disinformation that paints Western institutions as an aggressor.
Thank you, Matei. Now let's move on to the Visegrad region, to Edit, and kind of continuing this threat of impact of disinformation on elections. You know, there were recently elections in Poland, in Slovakia, next year elections in Czech Republic. So what do you think, based on your research, your experience, has the disinformation had on the outcome of elections? And could you maybe give us a short outline of what you have found in the Visegrad region when it comes to the relationship between disinformation, the role of civil society, and maybe also with a small focus on election, if you may? Now let's move on to the Visegrad region, to Edit, and kind of continuing this threat of impact of disinformation on elections. You know, there were recently elections in Poland, in Slovakia, next year elections in Czech Republic. So what do you think, based on your research, your experience, has the disinformation had on the outcome of elections? And could you maybe give us a short outline of what you have found in the Visegrad region when it comes to the relationship between disinformation, the role of civil society, and maybe also with a small focus on election, if you may?
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, it's a dubious privilege to paint this gloom and doom picture, in contrast to, and not in contrast, because I think there might be a contestation, which one is the most doom and gloom, which region. But definitely when it comes to Central Eastern Europe and the Visegrad countries, the organizations here, the civil society has been facing tremendous amount of political pressure, not only throughout election campaigns, but throughout the whole, the year cycle. And this is traditionally because the region has been always a battleground for geopolitical contexts. And I think we can safely say that Hungary and Slovakia are at the forefront of these attacks right now. And our report highlights many historical and political and cultural reasons why is that. So right now I would like to only cherry pick and highlight two main political reasons. So I would encourage everybody to read the full reports to get more food for thoughts and for more details. And one reason is definitely, as Daniel, you alluded to in your introduction, is that Slovakia and Hungary has a very unique disinformation space. And the most important channels of disinformation are not the fringe media, not the fringe political actors and extremists, but the governments themselves. And this is the key, because Mr. Orban and Mr. Fico are state sponsoring the pro-Kremlin disinformation from the mainstream, so to say, from in power, which is, of course, having a tremendous amount of, I would say, implication on the electoral component of the democracy. And as I said, the extreme actors are also there and doing a lot of damage, but technically they're mutually reinforcing what the governments are saying in these countries. the local enablers of the Kremlin. So this is one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is hugely legalistic, because these governments are also pushing, as you also alluded to, foreign agent type of laws against civilians. And this is crucial. It's paramount, because they wanted to institutionalize defamation campaigns against the civil society, which is, of course, contextualized in the disinformation in the media sphere as well. So our report highlighted two false dichotomies that I wanted to mention here regarding sovereignty, national sovereignty. These are very important, so to say, elements of these campaigns, and these are used and misused by Mr. Orban and Mr. Fico. So what these governments are arguing is that if you receive foreign funds, the civil society is technically undermining national sovereignty, and they don't stop at this point, because they put it into a broader geopolitical context, and that they're saying that if you're supporting Ukraine somehow, both on a political level or on the civil society level, you're also undermining national sovereignty. So that is a package deal that we are working here with. The argument is that Hungary and Slovakia are going to get to some sort of a colony of NATO and the European Union when it comes to this issue, which of course perfectly fits the Kremlin's narrative. And this is exactly that puts the third sector under tremendous amount of pressure, because there is a lot of intimidation in the system, and these governments are imposing a huge chilling effect on the market as well. As for the electoral component, this is what's tilting the playing field for the benefit of this kind of autocratic regimes, that they're helping themselves and their organizations financially and in the public sphere, and they're also making the others' life, independent civil society, very difficult to maneuver. Very happy to discuss the electoral side a little bit further during the Q&A if you would like. But what I wanted to mention is that Poland and Czech Republic are a little bit different story in the V4 countries, because they have a much better operating environment for the NGOs right now. As you know, in Poland, the Tusk government is trying to dismantle, or so to say, rebuild the political structures and restore the rule of law in cooperation with the civil society organizations that were discriminated before. So I'm first and foremost thinking about human rights organizations that were, helping migrants and sexual minorities, for example, and have been suffering a lot of political attacks during the last 8 years. Plus, in Poland, it is mostly the extreme right opposition that is pushing pro-Russian disinformation. And I think the same applies to the Czech Republic as well, where the far right and the communist actors are the key when it comes to pro-Russian, so to say, enabling and, pushing messages on Telegram and chain emails and so on and so forth. And just very briefly about what are the key trends when it comes to disinfo. Unsurprisingly, this is all about the war in Ukraine. So the key message here is that the West is responsible for the escalation of the war, and the real victim is, of course, Russia. But we see a split in the Visegrad countries because while Slovakia, Hungary, and the Czech far right are using this kind of misused term of sovereignty in this disinformation campaigns, like I mentioned that Viktor Orban and Robert Fico, how are they misusing this in terms of supporting Ukraine, and there are similar themes in the Czech Republic. The Polish far right is pushing a little bit different agenda, because they're trying to create an anti-Ukraine, anti-EU atmosphere by focusing on welfare chauvinism and, so to say, the Ukrainization of Poland. So this is a little bit of different messaging. And while there's a lot of volume on the war in Ukraine, we should not underestimate the negative impact on the civil society themselves, because it actually works on the minds and the hearts of the people. And we have a lot of data, partly from Globsec, for instance, that social support for helping Ukrainian refugees and support for Ukraine in general has been decreasing a lot, especially in Slovakia and Hungary. But there's also a lot of fatigue in terms of helping refugees in Poland. So this is something definitely worth to be considered with. And just to wrap it up, a few words about how does the third sector respond to all of it, because I think this is key. What are the capacities here? And the bad news is that what the report finds is that the third sector doesn't really have the capacity to counter disinformation effectively, or to execute quality campaigns with relevant impact when it comes to media literacy or awareness raising. And only larger Polish and Czech organizations could effectively push this anti-disinformation to counter the problems. And others were rather lacking both financial resources and appropriate trainings. And one of the biggest challenge here is as a lack of impactful strategic communication because of political polarization, which is partly because of the financial issues. So there's a lack of stable fundings for these organizations to build resilience. Most Hungarian NGOs are operating on an extremely tight budget. And on top of that, that's also key, security measures are being deprioritized in the third sector, which means that there is no capacity for developing digital competencies and cybersecurity skills. And I think that's why we need all hands on deck, and different sectors need to cooperate and collaborate from different regions to help them strengthening institutional resilience. And I'm very happy to discuss further and answer any questions you have. Thank you.
You painted a pretty bleak picture of the region, but since I come from Slovakia and I have witnessed many of these developments firsthand, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. But let me maybe finish this analysis on a more positive note. Are there any lessons to be learned from Polish and Hungarian CSOs, or how they could withstand, the administrative pressures and the attempts to silence them? Because Polish civil society, especially, was also under pressure, and yet, I believe, it managed to withstand and to come back. So, is there anything we could learn, from the region, maybe outside of the region, from this type of resilience?
Okay, I really try to be fulfilling the expectations of the positive wrapping up. I think what we definitely can say about Poland is that the environmental context mattered a lot when it comes to civil society organizations, and I would like to highlight two things. One of them is the media environment. So whenever you have a little bit more diverse media sphere than in Hungary, for instance, which is completely top-down centralized, as you know, and the media has been captured, it is a little bit more easier for the civil society actors to push their narratives and to reach out to the people with their counter messaging than that of the ones who are struggling in Hungary, where more than 80% of the media has been controlled by the government. So I think that was one thing that definitely helped the civil society organizations to push their envelopes and to reach out, not only because of to recruit finances, but also to engage the civilians to participate in local actions and initiatives when it comes to protecting minority rights, or to speak up against autocratic initiatives of PIS in the last 8 years. And the other thing is certainly that Poland is hugely decentralized when it comes to the institutional design and the government. And that was also something that eventually helped them on the local level to mutually engage civil society and civilians and work together with local administration, for instance, when it comes to the protection of minority rights or counter-messaging pro-Russian far-right issues. So I think these are definitely things worth to keep an eye on. So how much decentralization could help these organizations to thrive on a local level, but also, when it comes to the local and the national level. And media is another environment. But just to cycle back for a moment to Hungary, I think what another lesson that has been learned is that when it comes to the mental well-being of these organizations, there would need to be some sort of extra layer of support for these organizations to work out survival strategies, because 14 years is an extremely long amount of time for civil society organizations to suffer under autocratic governments. And, after a while, there is a question, why does it worth to be a beacon, or why does it worth to stay even in the country and to work for, the civil society to push things forward when it seems like nothing is changing? So I think certainly helping them strengthening financial and institutional capacities to work out, for instance, decision matrices in the long run, and early warning systems, how to respond and when to respond to disinformation. That's probably a good way to start about.
Hello from Skopje, North Macedonia. I'll be talking about disinformation and their effect on the work on the regional CSOs in the Western Balkans, primarily in North Macedonia, Kosovo, and Serbia. So when it comes to regional CSOs in those three countries, it can be emphasized that the conditions for their work are gradually worsening, mainly to the decrease of the donor support, the corruptive tendencies of the state funding for the CSOs, but also due to the inability of the organizations to develop strategies and practices for stable funding and staffing, better communication with the wider public, and connecting with local communities, something that the speakers before me also pointed about the CSOs in their regions. What is also notable by our report is that the CSOs in the Western Balkans are lacking the efficient adopting of the new technologies for their work. However, their organizational experience and the potential as important contributors for positive social changes remain significant in all three countries, could significantly benefit from coordinated and strategical support, internal reforming, and further development for the regional CSOs. The issue with the donors and the financing is not new. It's a problem that the CSOs in the region are facing a long time ago. The economical crisis after the pandemic has only worsened this situation, which was already difficult. And according to the CSOs representatives that we have interviewed, without foreign donations, there will be no active or real independent civic sector. The chronic lack of funding for the wide range of activities has always been a fundamental problem for the proper functioning of the CSOs and their stable functioning, as many of the issues that the CSOs are working on require longer activities and continual effort. In most of the countries in the region, there is no tradition of individual donations, so the CSOs are depending mainly on grants from foreign governments, foundations, or international organizations. According to the available reports and the interviews that we have conducted with regional CSOs in the past few years, the negative influence of disinformation content and campaigns in the Western Balkans has increased. Following the period of the pandemic and the start of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the flow of disinformation and propaganda has increased drastically. The regional disputes between Serbia and Kosovo, as well as North Macedonia and Bulgaria, has also contributed to dissemination of disinformation and propaganda. Online media and the social networks are the key tools for massive spread of disinformation, which affect the way how citizens are getting the news and how they are getting informed about important events. Most of the disinformation content in all three countries can be found on the social networks, where disinformation is mostly spread through an active network on online clusters. The information is spread on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, and often from there spills over to the mainstream TV and print media. Among these sources and actors who are there are various types of content creators, like active and former politicians, journalists, but as well as a lot of anonymous authors, and there is media content source without any verification from foreign sources like pro-Russia media or social media profiles. So what is happening is that very often online media used as a source of information, the social networks, and someone's personal views are presented as credible information. The problem of disinformation in the region is complex, requires a wide range of measures to address them effectively. But I will stop here, taking into consideration the time limitation, and I would ask all of you to read the report. And of course, we as Metamorphosis Foundation are always happy to be contacted for a further consultation.
Some strategies focused on media themselves. disinformation is profitable for owners of the media, and for that reason, they allow this content or actively support it. What is being done on the state and EU level? Maybe I would leave the EU level aside because we have the Digital Services Act, but any of our panelists, do you want to answer on this one? So is there anything being done at the state level in the countries that you have covered, to counter disinformation, and specifically looking at the media that are systematically spreading this type of content? Who wants to go first? Marijana, please.
Yes, I cannot talk about the state level of media strategies, but Metamorphosis Foundation has a fact-checking service as part of its functioning, and we also have two other media outlets: Meta in Macedonian language and Portal in Albanian, and all three Metamorphosis media outlets together won the prestigious Roberto Beliciones Award back in 2019 for promoting media for good. And together with 8 other organizations from the Western Balkans in 2020, we formed the Anti-Disinformation Network for the Balkans, meaning that we are using the media for promoting ethical journalism, and we are actively countering disinformation as CSO sector.
Thank you. Any other panelists you want to respond to these state measures on media spreading disinformation? Matei, please.
Yeah, I want to talk about a little bit about the procedure of the state to control the media. In this moment, we have here in Republic of Moldova, we have a new institution. It's called Center for Strategic Communication and Countering Disinformation. That this institution, it's created to find a way to harmonize the social information environment. And also we need to think about it when we are giving too much power to the state to control the media. It's also a problem, because we had that in Romania in 2020 in the COVID time, when the state closed different sites because they didn't like it. So also this is a huge problem. I agree to have this measure, but we need to think about it a lot, because sometimes the state cannot see all the truth. Thank you.
Urte, maybe if you can just give us a bit of information on how the approach of state authorities to specific media was carried out, because I know of several cases where Russian language or Russia-sponsored media were banned in several Baltic countries.
Lithuania was among the first countries that were brave enough to just simply ban such Lithuanian versions of Russian-based media as Sputnik, Urte, Balt News, and so on. So after it was like enough evidence was gained to support the fact that those outlets are spreading just simply disinformation. So Lithuania banned quite a lot of those back in our countries, and they are not accessible even through VPN or so on. So most of them are just simply banned, and yeah, that's how we manage.
Have your countries adjusted their educational programs to include more critical thinking, media literacy, and if so, how was this changed or achieved? So anyone who wants to speak more on the educational programs, critical thinking, and media literacy, Urte.
Yeah, I would agree with the second part of the question, that actually the burden is mostly on NGOs, and me and my colleagues have also been organizing a lot of media literacy workshops and so on. But finally, during the lessons in schools, we have it would be translated like citizenship education lessons. So finally, through that time, some of the schools are already integrating media literacy in those lessons for pupils. And as well, last year, finally, in the university, there's a new program where you can study media literacy as your own subject. So I think it was basically achieved through effortless. It was achieved through a lot of effort from NGOs and a very constant work from them. Yeah.
Let me maybe do the closing remarks now. Thank you all for attending, to our panelists for providing your insight in a very concise manner into these very complex issues, the relationship between disinformation, their impact on civil society, working not only on these issues, but also on many other societal issues across 4 European regions. We covered situation in the Baltics, Black Sea, Visegrad, and the Western Balkans. I want to thank you all. Thank you to our panelists for your excellent presentations. Thank to our audience here for asking interesting questions, even though we didn't have time to answer all of these, but please do reach out to us on our social media profiles and do read the 4 reports which are freely available on our website.